Everyone, welcome, welcome, come in. Nearer. People at the back, nearer.
Share the love.
Share. Welcome everyone, and welcome to this LGBTQ plus history walk. My name is Jake. I use they and he pronouns, and I am the co-chair of York LGBT Forum. I'm joined here today by...
Hello, I'm Ben Arnott, and I'm an old man. Because I'm an old man, I know quite a lot of social history of York because I saw it.
Yeah.
But I'm referencing multiple things.
Wonderful. And there's your husband there.
Oh,
He's arrived.
Yeah. I have a question for him.
So just a bit about how this is going to work. We are going to start outside here. We're going to go into Museum Gardens, via York Art Gallery and back to York Minster, and then if we've got time, we'll get to the Anne Lister plaque. If not, we'll stop there. And just for general information, Queer Arts have launched their centre today. If anyone wants any information about that, see Sarah, yay, or CJ, because we've got some leaflets. So Queer Arts, for those that don't know, is an LGBTQ plus arts-based not-for-profit in York, and they do all sorts of different arts-related projects, including dance, which you lead sometimes as well. So, to start with, why have we started here? Now, I did see the archivist. Yes! So why do you think we've started here?
Because there are LGBTQ stories that can be discovered in our archives.
Exactly, yes. So for those that don't know, this is our main central library in York, and underneath is where the city's archive is. And why we start here is because a lot of LGBT history, we only really know about it because of court records. And all of the court records and other important documentation is stored here. And this is what I want for us to reflect on, especially as we're going through this tour. We're living more and more in a challenging time for LGBT rights across the world, especially across the pond in America. And we need to reflect on our history and how that was like then and how much it's being changed now. Because if we don't remember our history, we are doomed to repeat what we've done before. So, have we got anything to add more, Ben, here?
I suppose I wanted to start with just talking about the fact that the law has had a huge impact on what we can and cannot do. And I would like to cite that in 1560, who was the king then? Or
Henry VIII.
1560?
1560, Elizabeth I.
Elizabeth I.
Okay.
Oh,
but under Elizabeth I, the law was changed, and there was an anti-sodomy law that was introduced in 1560. It's very difficult to tell. It wasn't a democratic society as to who's chosen to have this law. So if somebody has just decided to have a law under those monarchical environment, then this is just somebody's choice or a group of men's choice, all right? And because of that, it means that we are the subject of their laws, unlike what we have been used to in our own lifetimes. So the laws that came up both in the 17th century and again in the 19th century were in fact quite oppressive, but nevertheless, and also aimed at men. Men seem to be particularly concerned about men. And so that was definitely the way that we started, and we ended up having to fight our way out of that conundrum of laws. And so it did in the 20th century. I just wanted to make that as an overarching thing, and during the 20th century, it was interesting that the law, as you know, was changed in 67 to make it legal, instead of being criminally illegal to be gay at all. It was actually became legal for over 21s in strict privacy, right, of two people. That's behind a locked door, technically. So I'd like to say that, and I'll talk a bit more about those things.
Yes.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, everyone. Ben, would it be easy to go that way,
Yeah,
right?
quieter.
Yeah. We'll go the quiet way round, so everyone follow. I'll go at the back.
Good.
So we are now in Museum Gardens, and behind us is this impressive structure here. Does anyone know what this is?
Multangular tower. It's the Multangular Tower.
Yeah, the Multangular Tower. And this was built during the Roman times. And what was quite important was Emperor Hadrian built this structure here. Well, he didn't build it himself, but you know what I mean. And what was good about it and about Emperor Hadrian was that he was known to be a bisexual. And in our society, where bi erasure has happened quite a lot, to have somebody at the highest point of the land to be an openly bisexual person during in ancient times was really quite impressive. So as we use this space, and when we look at this space, we're going to transverse through different times and how our relationship to LGBTQ plus identities, and I'm going to use that phrase, has changed throughout time. So here is where Emperor Hadrian had quite one of his many lovers who he really loved, and unfortunately he died quite young, and because of that he made him a god. So next time you are in a relationship and someone's not making you into a god, I don't think they're for you. So this is why remember that. And I think we've always remembered that as queer people, and that it's important for us to reflect on how love and how relationships and the idea of relationship has changed. So Ben, have you got anything to add at this point?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Are you done?
I'm done there, yeah.
Okay. One of the key factors when men, I'm particularly thinking of men in history, were stuck outside the law is that you were then beyond moral compass, because the law said one thing and you were then outside of that when it became to your own behaviour. This means that actually it's very difficult to grasp where your moral compass is, because you end up in an environment where just being gay is illegal, so therefore you're stuck outside of the law. As a consequence, a lot of very casual sex used to happen because it was private, it had to be discreet, and it was criminal. So therefore, I can tell you where people used to cruise. And the thing was that if you were a gay man, it was quite often you'd find company in a circus, in the theatre. You'd find safety in travelling and running away. And it meant that careers were typical. Boxing was another one. They were typical environments in which safety was created, or at least some level of freedom, because nobody could pin you down unless you wanted it. And the thing was, if you were arriving at a town with a touring theatre company, where would you look to cruise? I'm asking you.
I guess like secluded areas. That
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
to them.
Bit of cover,
Yeah.
bit of
Yeah.
cover. Conventionally, it's riverbanks. Okay, and in the instance in York was slightly different, was also public toilets, right? The public toilets in York are all round the city walls, and they were put in by the local authority. My guess would be they started about 1880 when they did a major renovation on the walls to pretty them up a bit with tourists in mind. Not that they got tourists, but it was about restoring them, rather unlike what Chester did, which is ripping them down. And that was later. And so it means that those are places you can identify as going hunting. And that meant that you had a whole independent private club. And if I went out one night and I was then going cruising, and if I went out the next night, I might see some of the same people. So it was quite clubby, as in, go, oh look, oh look. And when I was an adolescent, somebody said to me, Ben, you've got to find out where the cruising areas are, because the law changed in 1967. I came out in 67, but I was 13. And it meant that when I actually did meet other people a few years later, I was still only 17, and somebody said, right, you're coming cruising with me. And what he did was showed me what went on. And we toured round the toilets, starting at Monk Bar. There was a toilet in the bar, and I can show you photographs of where it was. Then we walked round the outside of the walls to the next gate, which was Victoria Bar, which is near the what's the venue?
Vicky Vaults?
Yeah,
Victoria Vaults,
yes, Victoria Vaults, yes.
On Nunnery Lane.
Yes, but that's facing down Fulford Road, or going to be. And then we carried on something, and then he suddenly said, the police have now seen us twice, because the police, even after that, 67, were cruising round, watching the cruising. And it did mean that later on, it meant that it meant then we had to disappear. And he said, well, it's easy, we just go on the inside of the walls instead, and then they won't see us, you see. So we carried on the tour right round as far as the bar going out to Knavesmire, which is Micklegate Bar.
Micklegate, yeah.
But each gate bar had its own toilet facility, and there were others besides, like, you know, car parks are good for that kind of thing. And there used to be much more provision of public toilets than there are now. The point about that was that this was a secret arrangement, and this bit here along the river when I was a kid was busy, really busy, and there was a gate that came in here, and there was a toilet in the corner right where the posh restaurant is. Mm-hmm. That was busy. I've seen naked men walk out of the bushes there. And it does mean that's shifted as people got more aware, as the law changed and as people became more aware. What I find interesting is in 1970 I could lean out of a window in Micklegate and cruise like fuck, and nobody'd know what the fuck you were doing. They'd go, there's a nice one. Even point. No notice whatsoever. You can't do that now. I walk down the street. Do I look that gay? People don't know it. People just know it. And it means that as a consequence, the whole perception around identity is much more known by other people, which is a really healthy thing in reality. Stop there.
Thank you.
I will go on.
Thank you, Ben. And we're going to move towards St Mary's Abbey next. Thank you. So, can anyone tell me what this is?
Stone.
What's this building?
St Mary's Abbey.
St Mary's Abbey. And the reason why we're here was because of Henry VIII. And Henry VIII wanted to get divorced from Catherine of Aragon. And the only way he could do that was to split from the church and make himself the head of the Church of England. But as part of that, the monasteries used to own a lot of land, and they were very powerful in terms of the land that they owned. And one of the acts, and this is where things start to change. So before Henry VIII, any kind of, and it always was men, any kind of same-sexual male activity was dealt with by the church. When Henry VIII split from the Roman Church and the Catholic Church and set up the Church of England, he put into legislation, and it was the first time that in the Western world that it went from religious to state-sponsored violence towards LGBT people. And that is the Buggery Act. And the Buggery Act came with imprisonment or, in certain circumstances, the death penalty. And one of the reasons he used to close down all the monasteries, as well as to grab all the land, was to use that act. Because he said, all these men, all together. I wonder what they're getting up to. And that is one of the other reasons why the monasteries happened and the dissolution happened. So he used the Buggery Act to target different monasteries across the UK. One, to grab the land, but two, it's interesting how they used homophobic legislation in order to create the opportunities for the things like this. We're now going to go towards the art gallery way as well.
Yeah, but before you do, we're at the backside of the King's Manor here.
Oh yes, I forgot about this bit.
And the thing was that once the law changed in '67, which was partial change of the law, especially as I was adolescent at the time, it didn't do for me because it was 21. And the university students, who'd only really started arriving about 1966, 65, because the university also was founded in 67, but it had actually started at 65. They had a variety of sites around town, including this wallop of a job here, and they had students who thought that they should start a gay sock. So that I remember those early days of gay socks, a lot of timid people, not sure what to do. And we started having a disco. And the first discos I remember, I wasn't involved, I was too young, were in the basement of this St James's End of this building here. And they were the cellars, St James's Cellars were a bar. And what they did was they just hired it. They didn't say what it was for, and they invited people to come to it. And it was very popular. Mainly men, you know, in those days. But that was the first time we had a public social environment in which you could meet. There were other places that did exist, but I'll go into those otherwise. So that was the cellar, that's got a modern piece on the top. The cellars remain, so the rest of the building was lost, right? So only the cellars are there. The building in this corner is Victorian, but is an adaptation from that. Yeah. Okay, and the university is just about to give it up. Boo.
Boo.
Originally, there was a huge shed that went all the way to the far wall. It's a great big
to get to the statue.
Exhibition space because it is. It was the 1861 Great Exhibition. You know, the 1851 Great Exhibition was.
Oh, sorry, Ben.
Just taking your face off.
Knock me out.
Anyway, so that was that, and I was a student here where I came out.
Yay!
Whereas I came out to my family, it's a different matter. Do shut up, parents. And so what is to say here? There's a number of artists that were involved in the art gallery. Do you want to do that at the front?
No, you do it.
Okay.
Yep.
The thing was, there was a number of people in York who were well known at the end of the 19th century as gay men within the church. You'll be surprised. And so A.A. Milne and another collector and the person who owned the treasurer's house set it up they built it as a museum because they had no kids. So they were actually restoring, this got restored, as did Gray's Court, which is now a hotel, and also in the front of that was the treasurer's house. They all got major attention in the end of the 19th century, which saved them from falling down, but they also got mucked up in the process. But the people responsible largely initiated some of the collections that we've got in the art gallery because they donated that to the art gallery. The only reason we have ceramics in here is because the collection that was made in the first place, largely stolen now, was actually then put into this place. But on the back of that, then of course we had other ceramic collections, meant that we now have a vast ceramics collection, and I'm in it.
Yes.
So they are there. William Etty is one.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about him?
Yeah, so William Etty, and his statue is at the front. He was a really important person for the Art Gallery and helped to really fund the Art Gallery, and most of his collection is in the archive of the Art Gallery as well. But the importance of William Etty was people didn't really know his sexual orientation at the time, but he was very good at painting bums. So if you're next time you're in the York Art Gallery and you see his work, look at the bums, they're very good. But that's a bit about William Etty. But I forgot to say when I was round there, so for a short time, the York had the mint, so the Royal Mint, so the Royal Mint is what stamps our coins and our currency, and it creates it. So things were happening in London and it was getting a bit scary, and as York was the second city, the mint moved to York, and this was under William III. And what is important to know about Mary, William and the sister Anne, they were all on part of the LGBT spectrum in some way or another. So there's conversations that Mary and William were in an open marriage, that they were attracted to same gender as they identified with, and also they, with Anne, was quite known to have been a lesbian as well. And I thought I'd just add those bits in because I think it's quite interesting, because York isn't the second city anymore, but historically it was, and it was a very powerful city, a very royal city, and that's why there's a lot of references to royals, and there's more about royalty as we move around to King's Manor in a minute when we go round the front. So let's go that way.
Let's go to King's Manor then. Soon to be demolished.
You better not demolish it. So we now are here at King's Manor, and King's Manor was a royal palace, and as you can see it's very pretty and we quite like it. It's currently used by the University of York, mainly for their archaeology department, and it is very important for one reason, and I wanted to point this out. Well, there's two reasons why this space is very important. Can anyone see the writing at the bottom? What does it say? What does it say?
IR.
IR. So interesting. Who do we think IR is?
Irritable.
James, yes. Because in the olden days we didn't actually have a symbol for J yet, so that became a lot later. But this was constructed for James II, not James II, James I, when he came to York to stay in this manor. And at the time he was with his favourites, and a lot of kings had a lot of favourites, and his favourite was George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham. And it is said that these two faces, one represents Duke of Buckingham and one represents James I. What was quite sad about George Villiers was he was targeted by other nobles who were jealous of how close he was to James, and unfortunately was killed eventually because of his closeness to the James. James I had many male favourites over his years as king, but he didn't quite or never forget Duke of Buckingham. So I think it's really important to think about how power was working out during this time. We probably won't be able to get in today, and we could try and get into the court.
Well, you can try, but the point is there is 30 of us.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we'll go in. Yeah, we'll go in. We'll go into the court. Yeah.
You tell them.
So we are now in the centre of King's Manor, and I wonder if anyone shout out why this space is important in particular.
Anne Lister.
Anne Lister, yes. So this was turned into a girls' school, and this is where Anne Lister came to school. And up in the, this side, in the glass is scratched etchings of the girls that lived there, and they would say something like Susie loves Karen, maybe not Karen, but you know, more than
not Karen.
Jessica, or something like that. But one of the things is, and you remember this more than I do.
The wording.
Yeah, the wording.
It says, with this ring I scratch this glass, with these lips I kiss my lass.
Yes, that's right, yeah. And people have attributed that to Anne Lister. I think when we first started doing these tours, Anne Lister was known amongst the LGBT community, but has really made mainstream connections now, in particular because of the Gentleman Jack series. And I had the privilege and the honour to meet Helena Whitbread, who deciphered Anne Lister's diaries, and through that, because what happened when Anne Lister died and the relatives inherited the property, they found the diaries, and they just happened that they had someone they knew who could decipher, because it was all written in code. And that decipher, what they found, they didn't like it, because it talked about Anne Lister's love for women, and she had quite a lot of relationships with women over the years, and it was always tended to be people with a bit of money or a bit of class, so there was a lot of ladies, shall we say. But what happened then was the diaries were hidden away. And it was only until the 1950s, when they were rediscovered, that they actually deciphered, and Helena Whitbread took 7 to 8 years deciphering all of the diaries which came together. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? Like how we've just only walked literally in this square, but there's a lot of LGBT history happening in a short space of time. Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, the university got hold of this in about 1960, and it was in a wretched state. The door that, for example, came through here, that did not exist. So when you came in, you actually had to dogleg just to get through into the thing. And prior to the university having it, it was a blind school. This is the most revolting building for a blind school. If you walk about it, you'll soon see why. Because they've had to simplify its structure hugely just so it could be used by the university. So, and then departments were set up within here, as well as some of the buildings being used otherwise. The Architectural Studies Unit was here, and that was set up by David Reimer. Total closet. And then Peter Newton also was involved in archaeology, which I think is still here, is it not?
Yeah, archaeology.
And the point is that Peter Newton was a specialist in medieval glass, and so he knew his way around it. So when they were restoring the Minster glass, he would go in and shout at them for the abuse they were giving it, because they did certain things that he thought were just scandalous in terms of the protection of glass from an archaeologist's point of view. So these guys were here then, and as I was saying before, in the basement, you can have a look through there, there is a basement remaining, and it was a bar, and that's why it was rented for the first discos, as I referenced earlier on. I'm sorry the university is giving this up, because it's a fantastic place. My mother's sculpture is here.
Yeah.
My mother was trans, should have been a man. And this one is a calf she made. And when it was originally sited there, somebody had sprayed woof on the base. It's also had rubber noses on it. You know, what do you call them? Comedy noses, the red nose, etc., etc. She didn't mind about that. It looks a very shiny mouth now. It's just a calf. She just happened to end up having it here.
Every day people come in, and every time
they polish the nose.
Oh, wow.
It's going quite verdigris. It's going quite verdigris now, isn't it?
The snoot must be blue.
Okay. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you, folk.
Yeah, so we can't go up today, but if you do find time to go upstairs in King's Manor, please do look at the glass and try and find the scratches, because they're quite important. And it'd be interesting to see what happens with this building in the future.
It belongs to the council.
And it belongs to the council, so yeah. Well, thank you, everyone.
Starbucks. It'd be a Starbucks, won't it?
We are now going. Oh, I will just mention, whilst we're in a quieter space, that the degree rooms that was opposite the libraries was where a lot of the discos happened, and the LGBT discos during Anne Lister's time. So there was two ones. There was the.
What do you mean by during Anne Lister's time?
Not Anne Lister's. Yeah, Anne Lister's.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
I don't think they have discos in
No,
Well, they are balls.
Yes,
Yeah,
there is a difference between. I can tell the difference between balls and discos. All right?
It's basically the same thing. There's a lot of dancing involved. So they do a lot of dancing. And then the other one is now the Ask Italian, which is a shame.
The
assembly rooms.
Yes.
If you've ever been in the assembly rooms,
Yeah.
is quite beautiful, isn't it, with all of the ornate stuff. But that's where a lot of the dances took place as well. So there's always been dancing, and I'm a big believer in dancing too. So we're now going to walk towards the Minster and York Arms.
Yeah, we're going through Booth and Bar.
Yeah, through Bootham, yeah. By that way.
I'm sure.
The entrance was by the side. When I was a child, they were by the side here. That was the doorway to heaven, and then they moved it to the front here. So this has been adapted again for a totally different purpose. They then put toilets over there. I think there still are toilets there, aren't there? Yeah, that's right. Still are. So I'm glad there's some.
Runs this is gay as well.
Oh, really?
Yes, Alex.
Is he as old as me?
He's about 45.
No, right. Not 70. Right. So it means, yeah, the point is, I'm only mentioning it in that was a location that was really important for cruising. And the best time for that was once you'd finished work, you go home, have a bath, shower, you'd have a bath and come straight back out again with your pressed trousers, and you looked as smart as you could, just to take them down again. All right. We're at the York Arms, the Holy Grail, and it's one of the Smiths pubs. There's two Smiths, and they brew in Tadcaster, And the two brothers, one of them is quite demented, and sadly, I mean, he's quite old. It'd be interesting to see what happens when he dies, because the way the pubs are managed means that nobody will take this on as a venue, and it's been clandestinely a gay venue all the time I've been in York, since I came here in 50-something, and 1950-something, and then it was just this bit here. But it wasn't, obviously nowhere could declare that it was a gay pub, but it was a gay pub. Hello, David. And the thing was, the front bar might have a few trans people in it, but we would always acknowledge them, always be polite. We knew sweet Fanny Adams about trans issues, but in the back bar was where the boys were, right? And so that was generally the case. There were some lesbians too, but they would generally, it's interesting, because they were a minority in a minority environment, it was quite often by arrangement. You know, they'd come out together, if you see what I mean. It was a good venue in some ways. It was relatively safe, but it had the downsides in that the landlords did not want us there at all. And let me just deal with that partly. And later on, I started delivering the pink paper. Gay News was the first, right? You remember that? No, maybe you don't. But the point was that Gay News started about 1971. I missed the first issue, which was in W.H. Smith's in York. And I bought the second issue because there was no information. We had a landline, no computers, no internet. We didn't even have a television at that time. And it meant that how do you find out what is going on in the world? And then they produced Gay News. This is not an early edition. It's a later Gay News from 1980. But this paper was a lifesaver across the country, because it meant that I could go to these pages. It's a catalogue of every town in the country and where to go. Not cruising, but the social, you know, the things like which pubs you could use, which theatres were likely to be popular, which places could be shared. And so it was a LGBT cultural encyclopedia. They printed that on every single fortnightly paper. It was fortnightly, and they printed it every single time. But the July, no, that one's July. That's July the 24th to August the 20th. That's interesting. That makes it look like at this point, by 1980, it's monthly, right? So, but they didn't always later on. They didn't always publish the encyclopedia, because you don't need to keep seeing it. You know. But in the beginning, it was vital, because I did know this was here. I was already there, pal. But then that was partly because my dad took me in, and I was at the art school, which is where the art gallery is. So that nice and easy. But after this, into the 90s, and I come back to York in the 1990s, and in 91 I started distributing the pink paper. And the pink paper wasn't a good substitute for this, but it was a reasonable paper. And I would take it in there and leave there 20 or 30 in there, and then they started producing boys, and I started then distributing boys as well. That's much more, it was semi-pornographic, and it was... it had a centrefold. It had a centrefold, which was really quite crummy, and I often knew them. And the thing was that the papers came from London, and I distributed them to this place. But you had to be married to have the landlordship of this, right? And you had to live there. Okay, and so there were other restrictions. You weren't allowed to change the building. You weren't allowed to do all sorts of things. Nobody will take it on now, because they've got some common sense. Despite the fact this is a fantastic location for anything. And so...
No.
The landlord said to me, I don't like you leaving papers here, you see. My brother-in-law's a policeman, and he knows about this sort of thing. Bollocks. So I said, my dad's a policeman, which wasn't true because he wasn't anymore. But, you know, the point was, I wasn't having it. So what I did after that was I walked it out and rolled them up and passed them to every single person they were. And if he saw me coming in the door, he just went back upstairs, because he couldn't stand the fact I had the brazen to just pass out the papers instead of leaving them there, which is what he did not want me to do. But I distributed them to the Women's Centre, not many, to Priory Street. The university took 600 gay news, and what they did then was they went to the porters, and the students under, shut up, Dara made sure that the porters would receive them and take them and put them, and people picked them up, and people were very curious about being able to pick up a free paper, whether they were gay or not. So I was getting rid of 600 papers in the thing, so I collected 1,000 from the station at 2 o'clock in the morning and took them round town. There were other places I went to as well, but they've gone out of my head a bit. Oh, St John's College had a few, one or two others had a few. And the point was, Pink Paper rang me up and said, what are you doing with all these papers? Are you dumping them, you see? And I said, no, absolutely not. And when I go to see the venues, there weren't any left. So fortunately, because the university had such a good system of making sure that they were put out, they said, you're using more newspapers than any other pro rata for population in this town than anywhere else in the country. Eh? It's what?
More gays.
Yeah, well, people gazing. And, so that was that. The magic person in here was Dickie. Because when I went into the bar first with my dad, he was there, didn't talk to me then, but when I later went in, rather obviously on my own account, he actually took me aside and said, if you want to know anything about anybody, I can tell you what they're like. If you have any trouble, tell me. If there's any trouble, tell me. And if you have anything that goes really untoward, you must tell me. And I then later had a boyfriend, 15 years my junior, and Dickie had said the same thing to him. And the fact was, he was a kind of pub policeman on our side. And he did a remarkable job. He went to prison a few times, got locked up for cottaging. And indeed, my then boyfriend's dad once saw him in a cubicle by the bus area, Rugier Street. And he was inclined to ignore it, but he just went in and whacked him one. That's the sort of policeman he was. No wonder he didn't get promoted. And, and the point is, poor old Dickie, I saw him go to prison, and he had been to prison before. And it's actually just for cruising. It was pointless that he went to prison. Absolutely pointless. Anything else?
No, I just think it's really important about this place, isn't it? And how you look at it now, and its associations with the Smith Brewery and the family, and that kind of dual dynamic, that it was a gay pub and it was known as a gay pub. And yeah, I think it's quite interesting to see how much change. But Dickie was very important for the community and did a lot to support people who were coming out and coming to it.
And the reality was, he was underpaid. You know, he never got another job. He just worked the bar. He got on his bike, went back out to Tangle, came back again. You know, that was his job. His life cycle was actually very modest, but he was a key figure in protecting people's lives.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're going to go to the Minster next.
Yep.
That's where we are.
Looks lovely.
Does in the light, doesn't it?
Who put that up then?
Has that always been there? The Minster, yeah. I love that. Going, people.
Looks interesting.
Oh, there.
I keep seeing it and I want to know.
It's me!
If you all get a bit closer, it's going to be windy. There's a lot of noise.
We're at the Minster. It is windy. It's always windy at the Minster. It creates air tunnels. So we are now at York Minster, and this is a very important, but also quite I'm going to use the word, oppressive structure and history. So it was only until recently that same-sex people could have equal marriage. But before then, the church heavily discriminated against LGBT
they had
people.
30 members in the Lords are bishops, and they always voted anti-gay.
Yeah,
To use
always
a simple term
voted.
for it, LGBT.
Yeah, always voted against. And the reason why we stood out here was, I remember when we were campaigning for equal marriage. It was in the year 2010, and Ben's going to tell a story that relates to this as well. And we stood outside the Minster protesting for equal marriage. And then when it came through, it was wonderful because we were so happy that it had arrived. We also start York Pride from here. And every year now, within the church, there's an LGBT blessing / service for Pride. So in just a very short space of time, we've gone from the church completely opposing equal marriage to not quite accepting equal marriage yet, but we'll get there, little steps, to the parade starting from here, and also having a service for Pride. So things have really moved on. But this spot has always been a bed for LGBT activism. And Ben, you're going to tell a story about that.
There was a guy who's still in York, doesn't want to come and hear us talk about it. And he's Kenny Lieska.
Kenny!
Was living with Keith Crane at the time. And in 1990, he had just come from Edinburgh, where he'd been quite involved with ACT UP. And when he came here, then kind of instigated outrage activity. And in 1990, he had written out a form of marriage, which he then proposed to perform in front of the west door, and which was here. And we kind of realised that would be over in a flash because they get married and go home, you see. So what they actually did was that they got lots of people, including my lodger, who married some random person, to repeat the operation over and over. So it lasted for about 40 minutes, which gave the media time to turn up and take photographs, which is quite important. And so that was on Valentine's Day in 1991. So that was a sort of special event to mark that the church was against marriage for same-sex couples. It wasn't yet a twinkle in the government's eye, but it was something that we were starting the campaign on through that was outrage.
Yeah.
He then was involved in, only months later, York Outrage was involved. This is the Yorkshire Evening Press in April that same year. That's John Honeyman, now lives in Harrogate.
Yeah.
And I recognise one or two of the others. The point was outrage. I don't know what this was about, but what they were doing was objecting to the criminal justice bill.
Yeah.
Now, that was obviously a bill going through government that we did not like. In what way, actually, unfortunately, is not beyond my ken. But I'm glad to say, even in York, we demonstrated against it. I don't think it came to much because I don't know anything about it. There was no consequence. So hopefully that actually did contribute to making it better. Stephen and I got married in Quaker meeting. Coming up 9 years ago, not quite, and we actually celebrated by going up to the little hall which is called, I forgot, Jacob's Well, small enough to stop me paying too much for dinner. And so the main thing then, we were there, and actually the bishop is living next door, and he came to talk to us, and he just said, it'll be a long time till we do this. Well, he's talking about the Church of England. But that didn't mean to say he was against it. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to go and walk round to the Anne Lister Plaque now, and that's where we're going to end our tour. Yeah, that way. Okay. And that's where we'll end our tour. briefly.
Right, fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
So this is where the Bishop of Beverley stays when they're going to come here, but is quite interestingly at the time that I'm thinking of was a character called Frank Lester, who
It's making too much noise. Not.
we're going to get run over if we're not careful. There we are. It doesn't make any noise. Couldn't hear that, could we? And Frank Lester was known to be a homosexual, and it's very shocking, isn't it? Shocking. But in particular, he had a thing for thighs. I don't know why. Thighs, you know, thighs.
I thought you said flies.
Not flies, no, thighs. So he used to have a lot of young men that would dress up and would show off their thighs. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, then there you are. How do we get in? But as we were, and I always thought it was quite funny because you've got the church, right? And then you had that going on in there. So, you know, it's quite a nice mixture of difference that is happening.
So Jake, is that why they call it Passion the Bishop?
Yes, exactly. But as well as, just to note on this, with the Minster, there was someone high up in the church in the 17th century, and in that time, to be popish was a nickname to be gay. So they would say, "Oh, are you turning a bit popish?" Meaning, are you turning a bit gay? So it's interesting how that wording has been used and evolved over time. But we're going to go towards the plaque. We are heading that way.
You mean Holy Trinity?
Holy Trinity,
Okay.
yeah. Right, so this is Anne Lister's plaque. It was the very first rainbow permanent plaque that we've ever done in the UK. I will tell all about that and the history about it. Let's go find a space that we can stand in.
But the important thing here is that the wording was controversial and it got changed.
Yeah, should we go that way?
So he'll explain.
Right, we're all here. So this is our last stop today. So you saw when you came in, they saw the Anne Lister rainbow plaque. And the reason for that here is because Anne Lister married, in her eyes, Anne Walker in this church here. And some of you will remember that I mentioned about how Anne Lister has become more famous now because of the Gentleman Jack series. So, as one of the people that helped to get this plaque sorted, there was a lot of issues around the plaque. And I always use it in job interviews now when they say, name something that went wrong and you came out on the other side, and I would always use the plaque as an example. So when we set this up, we did a bit of a community consultation about which LGBT icons from York we wanted to have the first ever permanent rainbow LGBT plaque for in the country. And there was a number of different people. We thought of Frankie Howard, we thought of some others that will escape my memory, but we fell on Anne Lister because that was a name that kept coming. Now, I'm officially a little historian, and we were talking about the wording on the plaque, and we used the term gender non-conforming to describe Anne Lister because we weren't quite sure how Anne Lister would have identified. The word lesbian wasn't used yet. However, we came round to getting the first plaque, so we had that done, and we put that it was for Anne Lister, gender non-conforming person, married and worker in this church, blah, 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 blah. We got quite a few objections. First objection came from the church. They weren't happy that we put the word marriage in. They wanted sacrament, so we had to think about changing the plaque in a way, in particular because we wanted it to be permanently here. The other thing was the rainbow was the other way round. It was inverted. So the purple went first and then it went to red rather than red to purple. And we had a group of people who were quite angry that we didn't use the word lesbian, to the point that we ended up on Sky News, BBC News, and all sorts of national and international media. It is now used in academic research about how wording is associated with LGBT collections. So I felt like it was quite a thing. So instead, we took the plaque down and we changed it to say the first modern lesbian, which is the word that is often associated with Anne Lister. And we held in this venue another opening of the plaque ceremony. We had Helena Whitbread, who decoded the diaries, come and speak, and we also had at the time we were trying to get a permanent statue, so we had a maquette of Anne Lister of this statue. I think the statue is now in Halifax, that's where it ended up, but we were going to have it in York to begin with. So that is quite interesting to think about how the wording which we use and wording which people want is very different. So from an historian and from that kind of context, trying to fit that into our modern world was a challenge. So that concludes this tour, unless you've got anything to add finally.
Yes. This is not so much here. I'm talking about the history of socializing was actually quite important. From 1970, the university started having discos, club nights, and MESMAC has been able to set up some other social groups, which is quite good. It's interesting that the forum itself has evolved. Out of forum has become the Pride, which is an utterly separate group, because Pride itself is a huge undertaking, and because it's a huge undertaking, it has to be its own cycle. You know, starting as soon as you've had Pride, you then do the sums, and then you start next year's, and it's a big undertaking, and so it had to be utterly separate from what is otherwise any local social activity. And so the forum has created that. But Generate is also here in York and was started in York, and that's quite important. It's now a national organisation. And then, of course, as you will know because it will have been mentioned, Queer Arts has actually got funding for the next 4.5 years, something like.
Yeah,
and those, by the look of what they are trying to achieve, this is community arts for us. And as such, it's not trying to be fine art, it's actually looking at where the arts can help us develop. And that's actually a really positive thing in itself.
Yeah. And then as well, if we're talking about the Time to Be Out, which is an LGBT asylum seeker and refugee charity, came and started from York. It's one of two only LGBT asylum seeker charities. The other one is Euclid, which is an offshoot of Stonewall, which is based in London. So they support LGBT asylum seekers and refugees, and that was born in York as well.
I'd like to mention that I benefit, my partner, old partner, went out with somebody who turned out to be an asylum seeker, and we spent a lot of money on a lawyer trying to get them thing, and Time to Be Out came to the rescue and actually said, this is not going to work. And it wasn't going to work, and so they fled by flying to Belfast. They'd had their passports taken, including my ex-partner's, and they travelled to my sister's house in Ireland so as to be able to not be in Britain. So they actually found safety in Ireland, not in Britain. But that was good, with good advice. You see, that was essential because we knew what we were trying to do was not working. The government wasn't going to put up with it. They were appallingly disorganised. They raided the house on one occasion with the Home Office with 5 people, and tried to take them away, to put them on a plane that morning. And they failed because my husband pointed out they didn't have all the information, because they didn't. Not my husband, my ex-boyfriend. And so they have done good works and have saved people's lives. It makes a difference.
Yeah.
I recommend it.
So I think that's really important to show how activism still is live and well in York. It continues. If you would like to make a donation, please see CJ. If you also please follow Know York LGBT, and the videos that have been taken today will be on there as well. But we also want to pitch your talk, so come and say what you're doing as well.
Hi, my name's Ryan. I'm doing a first proper queer history tour tomorrow, 2 o'clock. We're meeting at the William Etty statue outside the art gallery. All of my sites are connected to literature and poetry, so as to differentiate from your tour. So we'll be visiting sites associated with Oscar Wilde, Virginia Woolf, W.H. Auden, and 2 out of 3 of the Brontes.
Ooh, you've got to leave them guessing which ones.
So yes, so tomorrow at 2 o'clock outside the art gallery.
Yeah.
Yay.
Hope to see some of you there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, folks.